Thank you indeed very much. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I was the Secretary of Education. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Sit there with your hands folded and don't bother the person next to you. That's fine. Thank you particularly to the students. Look, their hands are folded, bless their hearts. Look at that. Protect those hands. You guys are good, really good. Thank you. Uplifting and working on Sunday, too. I appreciate it. Very well done, sir. Thank you very much. Well, I appreciate your applause. I didn't get a wow like Gallagher, Medved, and Prager, but those are my buddies. But I did appreciate the applause on Morning in America. And I should applaud you, because if you're listening to Morning in America, you're listening from 3 to 6 in the morning. And I teased my audience last week. I said, you know, we're number 7 in the country, and we start without anybody on the West Coast listening. And the calls came in. We're listening, Bill. And then, you know, I get up at 3, and I don't like it, but I like your show. So anyway, thank you very much. How many of you actually have heard the show? Fantastic. Fantastic. Try Ambien. No, I'm kidding. I'm very grateful to you. Thanks for that great introduction. It was a wonderful ride. Chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities under Ronald Reagan, and then Secretary of Education, and then I was the first drug czar. Ridiculous title. Great job, but ridiculous title. I could refer to my wife as Zarling, and our then 2 little boys as the Zardines, but. The Secretary of Education job, I'll tell you how I got to Washington. I'm a professor of philosophy. I did a PhD in philosophy. Then I went to law school. I never practiced law. That's my brother who practices law. You know my brother. He defended Bill Clinton. And he also defended Cap Weinberger. And right now he is defending a CIA station chief who was the guy who destroyed all the tapes of those interrogations. And Bob Bennett told me he would defend all of these CIA guys for free if necessary, and I think that would be great. But I was just a philosophy professor, or not just, I was a philosophy professor when Ronald Reagan got elected, and after they filled all the big jobs, you know, the endowments were very special favorites of Richard Nixon, the National Endowments for the Arts and Humanities. More about that in a minute. But they filled all the big jobs, and they needed a chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities. So as I say, half joking, they began a nationwide search to find a professor of the humanities who had voted for Ronald Reagan. And there were 3 of us in America at that time. None had tenure. Isn't that interesting? And I was the second choice. Actually, it was second out of 3. First guy got nominated, and he came to Washington, gave a speech criticizing Lincoln, which, as the folks in the Lincoln Club will tell you, it's not really a smart thing to do. We don't have that many superstars in our party, and, you want to preserve them. Anyway, I got that job, and it was a wonderful job, and then Ronald Reagan asked me to be Secretary of Education. He said, I'd sure like to abolish this place, but I don't think I can, but maybe you could try to make some sense out of it. So I went into that job, and it was a lot of fun. I treasure my years in government. We can talk about this in the Q&A period, but let's get serious business, because I have a serious message for you. Not so much about the nation today, though the nation applies, but about your state, about this great state of California, the state of Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and many others. So thanks for having me, and I want to talk about a few things with you and make a plea. And it's the main reason I so quickly accepted your invitation to join you here. First, a couple of words, if I can, about the man whose home we're in. There's a lot that has been said about Richard Milhous Nixon, some good, a lot bad. He was a complicated figure in America. Recently deceased Bill Buckley described him as the Aztec calendar stone of the 20th century. Indeed, though, if one thinks through 20th century political America, one can say this about Richard Nixon. There are few who shaped the second half of the 20th century more than he. One thinks of the anti-communist movement in the 40s and 50s. One thinks of our relations with China. One thinks of affirmative action, the EPA, the ending of the Vietnam War, and one even thinks of the efforts of special prosecutors and independent counsels. But there are a few other things, too, things forgotten by too many historians, forgotten by too many Republicans and Democrats. And in writing a book called America, the Last Best Hope, my history book, not the one that we're selling today, which is the new book, American Patriot's Almanac, in my research on Richard Nixon, the legacy I think of most now when I think of Richard Nixon is his deep and long commitment to civil rights. Richard Nixon actually received over 30% of the black vote when he ran for president in 1960. 30%, a number no subsequent Republican candidate has ever come close to matching. Too many have forgotten how liked he was by the black community in America, how trusted he was. Long forgotten now is Jackie Robinson's public endorsement of Nixon for president in 1960, or Martin Luther King Sr.'s initial endorsement, or that several Republican people forget, too, that several Republican advisors tried to get President Eisenhower to dump Nixon, precisely because he was considered too close to the black community. Not a very happy part of those advisors' history, I might add, but a pretty good thing to be said about you if you're Richard Nixon. Martin Luther King wrote this to Vice President Nixon after meeting the Vice President. With persons like you occupying such important positions in our nation, I am sure that we will soon emerge from the bleak and desolate midnight of man's inhumanity to man. Pretty good. As Vice President and President of the Senate, he pushed through rulings in the Senate to help weaken the Southern Democrats' filibuster of the 1957 Civil Rights Act. So say what you will of Richard Nixon, and people will. This is a legacy I think very much worth remembering. It's been said one should remember a man not for the last things he did, but for the best things he did. This is how I choose to remember Richard Nixon. I'd like to speak to you today, however, about something else, not about the past, but about the future, and particularly the future of the conservative movement in America, the Republican Party, and particularly here in the state of California. My colleague, Brian Kennedy, whom you've already met and introduced, president of the Claremont Institute, he and I believe in two propositions on these matters. Proposition one, there is no Republican center of gravity outside of Washington, D.C. right now, and that is wrong. Proposition two, California should once again become the Republican center of gravity. That's a charge I give you, it's a mission I ask of you, and I plead with you to accept it. I ask of you to embrace a new Republican destiny that begins here in the Golden State. I spoke of Nixon earlier. Is this fine where I am on the mic? Is this fine? Okay. I spoke of Nixon earlier, and we are in his house. But California is also the land of Ronald Reagan. This is the land of Proposition 13. This is the state where the people, a majority of them voted to lower property taxes by that proposition and started a revolution. The people of California have voted for the English language in another proposition, including a majority of Hispanics in the state. And yet, in another, Californians have voted against counting by race, and in a fourth, for keeping marriage between a man and a woman. This This land, California, is indeed our land, America's land. It is fertile ground. It is fertile land, proleptic ground, the state from which most of our important trend lines begin, as we outside California know. It is the edge from which most of the country takes its cultural cues, and it should once again be the place from which the country should take its political cue. Because often enough, as these examples attest, the state knows who it is and what to do. At least at times it does. It used to be that way here, but it has not been that way here in your state, not in a very long time. Too long. As a result, well over 1 million Californians have left this state for other states in the past decade. What a thing to think about. You think about all of the people, all of the time rushing into this state. And now 1 million have left in the last decade. It should be the other way around, and it can be again. Since 1992, the Republican Party has lost California each and every presidential election. We have lost so badly, Republican candidates for president simply start their electoral math writing off your 55 electoral votes. This is not a way to win a campaign or a country, and the down tickers have suffered as well. The most prominent national politicians out of California are now, hold your ears if you want, Nancy Pelosi, Dianne Feinstein, Barbara Boxer, and Henry Waxman. We and you can do better. I still believe, as this state's finest governor believed, that it's always morning in America. And I believe in a new morning in California, too. That image requires a vision. Visions require plans, Republican plans, conservative Republican plans. But, some will ask, wasn't that conservative Republican plan defeated in November? The answer to that is no. Republican and conservative principles were not defeated in last year's election. They were not defeated because they were not offered. You heard more about earmarks than tax cuts from the Republican. And when you did hear about tax cuts, it was mostly from the Democrat. Free market health care reform, buried in a white paper. Social issues, nowhere to be found. Education reform, an issue Republicans should own, missing in action in the last election. I'll be happy to tell you about that if you want in the Q&A about education reform and why we should own it. Illegal immigration. Remember when it was a big topic? Was there a campaign hour on that topic? So on illegal immigration, with the billions that it cost this state, with the very word illegal in front of it, we should not shrink from the moral case and the justifiable effort to stop it. And by stopping it, we help stop a large part of the illegal drug problem, too, a large part of the massive crime problem, and a large drain on the state budget. There's no reason to tolerate illegal immigration, and there is no virtue in failing to oppose it in the name of tolerance or compassion. Let me offer a few thoughts on the national state of the Republican Party from where I see it and from where I hear it through my radio show callers, many of them calling from California at 3:10 in the morning. My apologies. First thing, let us never, ever give up reminding the people of California and America that the first responsibility of government is security. John Jay said in the Federalist Papers that the safety of our people and our country is the first and most important object of government. Let us reaffirm that responsibility as a party and never give it up. President George W. Bush will be thanked in time for much of his work, and this was his most important. He understood this principle. Let us hope President Barack Obama does as well. Right now, given the controversy he has unleashed over the CIA interrogation memos, I have my doubts. Let's say a word on behalf of practices and procedures that saw the slaughter that struck New York on September 11th, 2001, and were put in place so that no such slaughter would bury the citizens of Los Angeles as well. Let's say a word for the practices, procedures, and interrogations, yes, that stopped the second wave of attacks that were aimed right here in California. Let's say a word for the practices and procedures that led to no deaths, but gained us some 6,000 intelligence reports that helped us get Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in the first place. That word, success. Let's say that word. You want another word? I'll give you two. Well done. The idea that we may prosecute public civil servants who offered legal conclusions about these issues and procedures is itself a repugnant idea. I believe in the long haul, the current president will see that he opened a Pandora's box that he will wish he had simply kept shut. When you build a gallows, be sure you know whom you wish to hang. What is the charge ultimately? That we should blame the previous administration for being too tough on terrorists who are going to attack and kill us again? Is that the charge? The American people are too smart for that kind of thing, and my only regret is that we have not mouthed a strong enough offense against this latter-day second-guessing. Let us then never forget the face and hand of the enemy, because there is still much work to be done. Next time they give you a report, see a report on TV from Pakistan, look at the footage of those marching Taliban. Look at the crowds, look at the mobs, look at what they do. We read last week that Mullah Omar, the head of the Taliban, is working with a former inmate of Guantanamo Bay, a terrorist whom we had and then released. And they are working to further attack our civilian and military interests in Afghanistan. And they have even colluded with the man responsible for planning the assassination of Benazir Bhutto. This war is not over. Keep it foremost. I don't know how many of you have read the recent story about a woman named Samira Jassam. She is in Iraq. She's a 51-year-old woman known by her nickname, the Mother of Believers. Do you know why she's famous? She's famous because she has recruited more than 80 female suicide bombers. She has done that after recruiting as many men to rape those 80 women as possible. She orchestrates their rapes so that she can later recruit them by convincing them that martyrdom is the only way to escape the shame of the rape. This is the face and the hand of the enemy that is poised against us. Don't forget it. Let our leaders know that we simply cannot share the earth with people like this. If our party does nothing else, let it always stand as the party of civilization. But we can and must do more, even when we're not in power. We are now, as you know, in the middle of a debate in Washington over spending. The speech, the rhetoric, comes to us loud and clear. It is as if government's first responsibility now is to fix every leaky faucet of every leaky life in America. As if growth and jobs and employment can be fixed by more borrowing, greater spending, and greater deficits. Never, never should our party cede to the notion of the nanny state, so well defined by Margaret Thatcher, the state that takes too much from you in order to do too much for you. 2, a word on how we got here. We must continue to affirm that men are free, even as we deplore, as we recognized, the constant threat of the encroachment of government, even as we deplore, as we recognize as not inevitable, the willingness of people in private enterprise themselves to ask the government to enter in their business. We deplore government overreach by government, but we also, in our time, must deplore the willingness to overreach to government, to lurch toward government when trouble hits. As William Schlamm put it famously, it's a favorite quote of Bill Buckley's, the trouble with socialism is socialism. The trouble with capitalism is some capitalists. Too many capitalists have recently given a bad name to capitalism, to Republicans, and to the meaning of the term, the loyal opposition. Third, in addition to getting into the economic debate, the budget debate, and in addition to talking about defense, we must affirm, if we believe in civilization, the prominence of the culture. Barack Obama won in part for the cultural symbols that the majority of our country recognized and that we didn't. For years, I and a few others have warned about things and messages and corridor posters in our schools, the self-esteem movement, the feel-good movement, where feeling good, self-esteem, and emotional response became the highest order of the classroom and the schoolyard. For years, some of us have warned about the cultural relativism and political correctness on our campuses and universities. We said there would be a payday for all that, even as Hollywood, editorial pages, and other elite institutional message givers were aping these themes in our schools and colleges. My friend Dorothy Rabinowitz in the Wall Street Journal put it this way last week. 5 decades of teaching in colleges and universities across the land, portraying the U.S. as a power mainly responsible for injustice and evil, whose military might is a danger to the world, a nation built on the fruits of greed, rapacity, and racism, have had their effect. The products of this education find nothing strange in a president quick to focus on the theme of American moral failure. To my mind, to date, this is the most disappointing thing he has done. He has gone abroad and has not represented American strength and virtue, but has apologized too often for America. He may not share many of their views, but there is nonetheless much that people find and like and find familiar about him. The American people may not in the end share his views of America as this moral failure, but they find what he is saying very familiar It's what they learned in college. Too many dismissed our warnings about this line of teaching and thought that those messages would be lost in the real world, that one could transition from a soft America to a hard America and leave all of that behind. They were wrong, and we were right. The Obama campaign was the beneficiary. Do it yourself. Go into a high school history class. Heck, go into a college history class. Ask people who George C. Marshall was. Ask who Jimmy Doolittle was. Ask who any brave POW of Vietnam was, and you will get blank stares. But our students know well who Rosa Parks was. They know well who Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were. They know well who Harriet Tubman was. They even know something about Sacagawea and Queen Liliuokalani. Don't get me wrong. They should certainly know about Parks and King and Tubman, and maybe even a little about Sacagawea and Liliuokalani. But by gosh, they should know as well who Marshall and Doolittle were. They should know who John McCain was, and they should know what he stood for. And they should know about men like Orson Swindle and Mike Christian and Everett Alvarez, who stood with McCain and longer, and what they did and what they sacrificed for this place we call America, in that God-forsaken place known as the Hanoi Hilton. Not God-forsaken, there is no God-forsaken place. Nearly God-forsaken. They should know about the bravery of great Americans like that, too. But they don't. I know they don't. Obama could resonate with the new America our institutions have created. McCain could not. The culture is now stacked against our team and in favor of their team. They've won the cultural message, the cultural template about what and who America is and what it means. But California, as it always seems to, made a bit of a comeback last week, as it often does. This time the setting was not the war or the budget or the Congress. It was an unlikely setting for a cultural battle and a politically pregnant event. It was the Miss USA pageant. So God love Carrie Prejean, a 21-year-old who could have taken the easy way out of a difficult question, but instead said that marriage is, or ought to be, the blessed union of a man and a woman. She was lambasted. It may have cost her the crown, but she was looking and thinking about another kind of crown. She said on the Today Show after her loss, she felt blessed to have been given the question she was given, and that it was her duty to not be politically correct, but to be biblically correct. Her college, San Diego Christian College, is proud of her. Her parents are proud of her, and we should be proud of her. In an age when we expect cavilling, soft speak, and cutting corners to get ahead, this young woman said, "No, I will speak the truth. Don't tell me all our youth have to follow the models of Britney Spears. Parents, grandparents, point your young girls to Carrie Prejean." And let me say something else, too, to our movement about gay marriage that is often lost in this debate. I've seen it again and again. Young people wanting marriage, seeing it as a gold standard for life, something to aspire to, a real interest. My wife teaches in the inner city in Washington, D.C., and she said most of her girls who do not come from parents who were married want to be married. Almost all of them want to be married. It's very high among the boys, too. It is an aspiration for young people to be married. Let's face it, when it comes to this issue, we may have opposed gay marriage and made ourselves feel better about that, but we haven't really done a very good job of restoring and strengthening this institution and reaching out to young people about it. There are a lot of cultural messages we send as a country to diminish our seriousness about the importance of marriage. We're the politicians who speak to young people about the importance of marriage and family. That's a social issue too, and it's not just gay marriage. I don't believe in gay marriage, but as I've said again and again, there are other things that hurt families and marriage as much more. The mockery of marriage by the hookup culture, the shacking up culture, the out-of-wedlock birth culture, which is through the roof. Last year, 40% of all births were out of wedlock. 40% of all births, and the divorce culture. How can we oppose one mockery of marriage and ask to be taken seriously when we give a pass to these other things that diminish marriage even more as a predicate. Many of us have experience with this. I came from a broken home. My parents were divorced, but they weren't proud of that. When you have children's icons like a Britney Spears engaging in a marriage that lasts 3 days, or her younger sister giving birth without marriage before she's 20, and parents taking their teen daughters and sons to see this half-sex, half-music performance, that hurts the norm too. Why aren't we speaking about that? We can. The problem isn't just gay marriage, it's a whole lifestyle and coarsening of the messages being sent to young people. The institution has been cheapened by a lot of things, and frankly, gay marriage is not the top of the list. The difference is it's something we get to vote on, and when we vote on it, we don't pass it. But we have to talk to children about the predicates of all these things. It's a sad state to be in when the headlines tell us homosexuals want to marry, while a lot of the heterosexual community is throwing marriage out the window. Don't tell me that politics, then, is more important than culture. It's not. Culture shapes our politics, and we should never, ever cede that ground. That gets me to my final point. We as Republicans always seek a big tent. We delight in quoting Ronald Reagan that the person who agrees with you 80% of the time is a friend and an ally and not a 20% traitor. Ronald Reagan, of course, as usual, was right. And he won every election he ever ran in, save one. He even won Massachusetts in 2 of those elections, and California in all of them. We can live with the 80% rule, of course. That's what an open and welcoming party does. Let's never forget a political movement is like a tree. Branches open and spread in all directions when the trunk is strong. So spread the branches, but keep strong the trunk. And let us never replace the ardor of principle with the ardor of compromise. Which gets me to the latest notion popular on too many post-election, post-mortem television shows. We lose because of our adherence to social and cultural principle. When the next protesting moderate Republican stands up and tells you he no longer recognizes this party, ask him, what part? The taxes? The spending? The message about life and family values? Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush won elections by not softening on these things. And here's a small history lesson. It was always thus with the Republican Party. The first Republican platform of 1856, the party Abraham Lincoln had joined, stood against what it called the twin relics of barbarism, slavery and polygamy. Our party was founded on notions of human rights and family values. That's the Republican Party. 4 years later, the platform Abraham Lincoln ran on incorporated the Declaration of Independence, self-evident truths that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights. We do not and should not shy away from these principles, and we should not give in to a nanny state that promises to replace them. A final word, if I may, on a final lesson from Ronald Reagan and the work that I am engaged in now. In his 1989 farewell to the nation, Reagan warned against the national amnesia, saying that in previous times we were taught very directly what it means to be an American. We absorbed almost in the air a love of country and an appreciation of its institutions. He then said something very interesting. Something that children get their sense of patriotism from their parents, and if not from them or from their neighborhoods, and if not from them, then you, of course, he said, would get a sense of patriotism from school. And if that failed, you could get a sense of patriotism from the popular culture. That was a long time ago, he said. Something has changed, he warned, and younger parents aren't sure that an unambivalent appreciation of America is the right thing to teach modern children. And as for those who create the popular culture, well-grounded patriotism is no longer the style. Ronald Reagan warned of this danger because he said freedom is too special, too rare, and too fragile, and we can lose it. And he concluded by asking each and every American to do what they could to reverse it. This is the center of my life's work now, on radio, in books, in my work with teachers and legislators. Through Claremont, I have the Claremont Institute American History Project, where we are working to get first-rate books and materials on American history from the libraries and living rooms of America into the classrooms of America. I've assembled a team of award-winning teachers to turn my books, America, the Last Best Hope, Volumes 1 and 2, into textbooks, and we'll be using the American Patriot's Almanac as well later. returning them into textbooks and creating a curriculum online and on paper. The books have been praised from the right, the center, and even a couple of people on the moderate left. It's working. We are now approved for adoption in the schools in Indiana, Illinois, and New York City. Plato said there are really only two important, or at the end, two fundamentally important questions for every society. Who gets to teach the children, and what do we teach them? We want every state and city in America to teach these books and to teach these lessons, because every state and city makes up what we call America, and that includes California preeminently. And we're working hard on it here. Brian and I will be meeting over the next couple of days to talk about that further here for this state. Teaching our children well. A solid, complete education is an 80% voter approval and support issue, if not more. I want California to lead the nation in a subject, not trail the nation, as it has been doing. Why not American history, which is in fact our kids' worst subject? It's worse than reading or math, is their knowledge of American history. We owe it to them. They are our future. We owe them better than what we've been doing. Ladies and gentlemen, for too long, patriotism has been seen and characterized by our critics as a down-market commodity, something sophisticates disdain. No more. It does not have to be this way, and I think here in California is where our cultural renewal, our political renewal can begin again. The writer Tom Wolfe has a great phrase. He says we have to engage from time to time in a great relearning, and so we do. So let the learning begin here in this state. I offer to help all I can. Why? Call it returning the favor. Because in Washington 28 years ago, a Californian who became president took me in and raised me up. And then he raised me up again. I would like to return the favor to the state he loved and revered, the state Richard Nixon loved and revered, your California. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Secretary Bennett has agreed to take some questions, so if you raise your hand, I'll bring the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett, for making common sense so simple and stating it so eloquently. My question is, I'm told that you have a particularly interesting story about President Nixon that we'd like to hear.
Oh, well, I told you that in private. You mean Bill O'Reilly, don't you? Yeah. The one I told you about Nixon, President Nixon, something I treasured was a note from Richard Nixon saying he was reading some stuff I'd written, saw me on TV, and it was a very nice note, and I saved it and treasured it, and I'm not going to give it to you. I'm going to keep it. You want the O'Reilly story? Because O'Reilly's been here how many times? 3 times. 1 for me, 3 for O'Reilly, okay? Gallagher, Medved, Hewitt, O'Reilly. All right, I see what I'm up against. Well, this really was hilarious, because funny stories are when people are in character. We had a dream dinner party at our house. We don't do this all the time, and we get turned down like everybody else, but this time everybody we had invited for dinner accepted. And my wife believes in one conversation at the dinner table, and she likes me to start it, but not to finish it. So we invited Condoleezza Rice and spouse. She's not married. My wife set her up, got somebody. She said, she is tough, boy, who is worthy, you know? Anyway, Condoleezza Rice and a date my wife found for her. Don Rumsfeld and Joyce Rumsfeld. And Bill O'Reilly. Mrs. O'Reilly couldn't come, and a couple other folks. So this was I said, honey, it's not going to be hard to get this crowd going, all these people talk. She said, just start with something. So I remembered something I heard someone else do, so I repeated. I said, a lot of people are impressed to meet you. Who was the person you were most impressed when you met? Who meeting whom knocked you over? I'm sure when you meet people, you knock them over. So we started with Rumsfeld. Don Rumsfeld said, I met Jimmy Stewart at Chazen's restaurant in Los Angeles. He said, and I will never forget it. He got that big grin. He said, it was fabulous. Condoleezza Rice said, oh, that's easy. She said, I remember exactly who it was. It was Tommy Casanova. Anybody here know who that was? Anybody? Guys? Nobody? All right, he was a defensive back for LSU, and he went and played for the Cincinnati Bengals. And he was about the most handsome man imaginable, and his name was Tommy Casanova, you know? Some guys have all the breaks. Anyway, she said, I was a senior in high school, and I met Tommy Casanova, and she said, my heart just, it's still not still. She was a high school cheerleader and met Tommy Casanova. I said, all right, O'Reilly. He said, well, you know, Secretary, I've been thinking about it while you other folks have been talking. I can't really think anybody I was that impressed with, but a lot of people are really impressed to meet me. You're right about that. So Connor Cruz O'Brien says of Edmund Burke, he had the gift of always being himself. And that's the gift Bill has. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I have an observation followed with a question. You know, it seems that the first 100 days of the new president has been to discredit the prior administration and Republicanism overall. And as you said, there's many good things to say, and he tends to want to tuck those away. So I see this as a way in which he's trying to suppress our vote, trying to demoralize us, to avoid us from going to the voting booth. But then I see speakers who go out, these tea parties that are happening that mobilize our group, and it just seems so far and few between. You coming out today is a good testament to it happening. How do we get our leaders back out in front of the crowd versus being just in front of a television screen or behind a microphone?
Well, I think conservatives are being somewhat energized by this. They're freer to state their views and express themselves. It was difficult during the Bush years because for a lot of us, we very much admired a lot of what George Bush was doing, but also disagreed with a lot of what he was doing. And so with Obama, there's a kind of unanimity of opinion among conservatives, even among Republicans, which is not the same thing. I mean, when they stood shoulder to shoulder on that, on that big first big spending stimulus package was pretty impressive. So I think some people are getting energized. The frank answer to your question is how to get people out in front now. Patience. I don't think it's going to be particularly noticed now. This is his moment. This is his 100 days. He's blocking the sun. I mean, the guy is. Say this for him. He is a transformational political figure. I'm going to say a couple things positive and then a couple things negative. Don't worry, it'll all be positive. He is about the best politician I have ever seen. This guy is remarkably good. Remember what he did, who he beat in the Democrat Party. Forget beating McCain. He beat the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party has been owned by the Clintons, and he beat them, in their own backyard. And then he beat John McCain. He is remarkably good. Gifted, just in talking about as a political creature. Second, he is skillful at what he's done and has bit off an awful lot. Look at the agenda. This has had the effect not only of giving the impression that he is working on everything and fixing everything, but has thrown off his critics, as Machiavelli would point out, come at him in a lot of ways, and it divides the criticism. If you turn on the radio and you hear Gallagher or Medved, or whoever. Still hurts. Prager. Anyway, it was that lady right there. I see her right there. Anyway, I need a kiss from you. All right. And they say, you know what really bothers me the most about Obama? You don't know what's going to follow because it isn't obvious. It could be any one of 50 things because he's doing an awful lot of things. So that's to be said for him. Now, the weakness here, I think, is that they're still in campaign mode. You're right. And he was not running so much against McCain as he running against Bush. Did that during the campaign. He's still doing that. And it's going to get old soon. The second 100 days is not going to be as pleasant, I think, as the first 100 days. But his popularity is huge. So Republicans, I think, conservatives need to be patient, need to get the arguments in a row and wait. And things will start to happen, or unfortunately for Barack Obama, some things may not begin to happen that he would like to happen. My criticisms are that, first of all, he does not consult with Congress, which is interesting. I know that's kind of an insider thing, and maybe you don't want him to consult with Congress, given who's running that show. But it's very inept politically. Second, the ego is enormous, the preening ego. I realized on the trip to Europe, I was not only bothered by him running down the country. No president has ever done that before, so systematically talk down the country on foreign soil. But how the point was that it was about him. It's about him. It's not about the country. He couldn't even stand up for JFK when Daniel Ortega gave a 55-minute speech and talked about the Bay of Pigs. He wouldn't even stand up for his idol, Kennedy. And as you all know, that kind of ego has weaknesses. But apart from that, I think there are just large systematic weaknesses in the plan. I don't think to say that our education system is one of the three pieces that needs to be fixed and we will fix it by spending ever more money just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I'll tell you about the issue I know best. It just doesn't make sense. Because as I will do at the Milken Conference the day after tomorrow in Los Angeles, point out that education spending chart goes up like that, the line goes like that, and performance is still flat. It's not spending that's the answer. And the notion that if we just spent more money, we would stimulate the economy and have more money, I just think the logic of that is challenging. It's not there. More importantly, although I think he actually did better than I thought on Iraq and Afghanistan so far, I think that this is going to be a real problem for him. I don't think he'll be able to keep the Democrat base, either on the Hill or in the country, if he decides he wants to stay in Afghanistan. Members of the Appropriations Committee the other day were talking about that. And I think he has weakened the country and made us more open to hurt and damage because of the CIA thing, which was just a terrible thing to do. Again, I think motivated by Bush hatred and revenge on the Bushes. I think you're right, and not by serious political considerations. And my friend Brian, who's expert on it, tells me maybe the worst thing he's done is to decide he's just going to scuttle missile defense, which we're going to need. We're going to need missile defense. Has it occurred to you that the Taliban might actually take over Pakistan? And you know what Pakistan has in its arsenal? So I mean, you look around the world now. It's a frightening prospect. So it's hard, I know, for conservatives and Republicans to see this guy at 70% popularity. It's not terribly unusual, given the presidency and what people's ratings are at this point. But look how much he has promised. And if he promises all that and delivers it, well, fine. But if he doesn't, then I think there will be a reckoning. And then I happen to believe we have a good bench. The people you're encouraging to get out and get around, I happen to like a lot of the people we have. You got a guy here in California, Kevin McCarthy. Where's his district? I don't know where it is. Where? Yeah. Bakersfield. He's a terrific guy. My guy, Paul Ryan from Wisconsin. I say my guy because he was, Mowgli was raised by wolves. Paul Ryan was raised by Jack Kemp and Bill Bennett at Empower America. And he ended up at my end of the shop. They come in the Kemp end to do economics, and then they see at my end we're doing drugs, sex, and rock and roll, and they come back there, The cultural stuff gets them in the end, But anyway, and Mike Pence, and there's just a lot of people who I think are very impressive. I think we have a future. It took a long time on that. Yes, sir. Here? Here, yeah.
Mr. Secretary, regarding education, what is it going to take for our country to get the school children, the high school children, back into the sciences, mathematics, the things that we need to take us to the 21st century and beyond? It's
a great question. Again, I don't blame the students. You don't blame young people for being young people. You blame the people who are supposed to deliver the educational system. The science particularly, talk forever about this, but it's a big topic. Let me just give you the facts. If you remember one thing about American education, remember this. When we test our kids in math and science against kids from other industrialized countries, when we test them in the 4th grade, our kids finish in the top quarter. When we test them in the 8th grade, they're in the middle. We test them in 12th grade, they're near the bottom. The longer you stay in school in America, the dumber you get. Relative. No, guys aren't dumb. well, these are all mathematicians, too. If they're music and mathematics, the Greeks understood that, you know. Relative to kids in other countries. Look at the TIMSS, the International Assessments in Math and Science. But note, this doesn't mean there's something wrong with Americans genetically, because in the fourth grade, we're okay. What happens? Curriculum falls apart. We stop challenging kids. And we don't, kids may want to cold their ears here, make them take serious math and science courses. And you have to front load math and science in the early grades in a way you don't have to front load the other subjects, because you will have more defections from math and science than into math and science. That's the way the world works. So I think that's one thing. One way to loosen that up is to take the very able talent we have in this country that is math and science proficient and let those people in the schools, whether they have teaching certificates or not. So I remember being in Palo Alto with some friends. We were talking about this. Some friends were executives with Kleiner Perkins there in Palo Alto, and they said they didn't have enough math and science teachers in Palo Alto. You know the technical expertise in Palo Alto, how thick it is? And yet, well, they said we have loads of talent, but these people aren't allowed to teach in the schools. It's quite remarkable. That's one way. Look, I think school choice too is a big thing. One of the reasons that, and I did want to say this. If someone wants to say what's the absolutely worst thing this administration's done, it's not the biggest thing, but the DC Scholarship Program. 1,700 minority kids got an extra appropriation from Congress, and they can take that money and use it for tuition at private schools. Most of them went to parochial schools, Catholic schools in the city. 1,700, all poor, all minority except one kid, are taking advantage of this, and their parents taking advantage of it. And the scores are up, and the parents are happy, and the kids are happy, the schools love having them, and they killed that program. They killed that program for those children because the teachers' union said, can't let that be. Now, Republicans, conservatives should be all over. Who do you support in the schools? You support the kids, or do you support the teachers' union? It's an easy one. It's a layup. Yes, sir.
Mr. Bennett, do you think that the tea parties that we recently had and more planned are going to be effective at all?
I think they were good for what they were, and I got a little confused about what they were, but I thought they were about the taxes and big government. But then I was listening to Glenn Beck, and Glenn Beck said no. But then he said things I don't understand. So I love Glenn, but he's losing me. He's losing me. And I said, Glenn, I'm going to pass out if you keep doing this, talking like this. Anyway, I love Glenn, but I don't know where he's going with this. I think it's fine. I think it's fine because this is what Thomas Jefferson talks about. The reason it won't last like that, it wasn't intended to last like that, because it wasn't about a specific focus thing. People came out with lots of different grievances, to use Jefferson's word, and that's fine. But I think it does show you that you could turn out a lot of people pretty quickly and pretty easily on a work day, because people cared about it. And I think we'll be seeing more and more of this, because I really do think no matter what else happens, people are going to get hit and hit hard in the pocketbook. We're going to see taxes. A lot of people's taxes go up, and I think we're going to see inflation. And I think what's started there, April 15th, will continue.
Howdy. I have 3 sons that have lived in a variety of countries where the people in Japan, for instance, love Americans but hate America. And that harkens back to the mention you made of President Obama's trip as being about his personality. The phrase perception is reality is one I don't agree with. But may I ask you please, how important a role is, say, Europe's and Japan's perception of our president in its relationship to American policies, regardless what they may be?
Not much. I mean, nations will act out of self-interest, and as they should, and whether they particularly like the president or not, I would say, that's what will govern them. To date, by the way, when George Bush, went into Iraq and brought us into Iraq, 29 other nations went with him, which is 29 more than Barack Obama has cooperating with anything he proposed in Europe. Yes. So it was a more multilateral, if you will, engagement at the time. But you make a very good point. Americans are liked around the world, and America is very much liked around the world too. I mean, what was the problem that George Bush had with Václav Havel? What was the problem he had with Angela Merkel? What was the problem he had with Tony Blair? I heard Tony Blair speak about George Bush in Europe, to a largely European audience, and he praised him a great deal. And the one thing that is really galling to me is the apologies to the Muslim world. When George Bush has done more for Muslims than anybody in the history of Islam. Maybe Muhammad did more. I don't know, but I don't know. He started it. I guess you got to give him. But George Bush has freed almost 50 million Muslims, and they're not putting women in shredding machines anymore. This woman I cited still does her work. But thanks to George Bush and the U.S. military, they're on the run in Iraq and will be in Afghanistan. And what did we do that for? Did we do that for oil or loot or stuff in the castle? We do it because that's what we do. That's why I call my books The Last Best Hope. I should probably end here. But when I was Secretary of Education, my wife, who was a former special ed teacher, she now runs the Best Friends Foundation, which is this fabulous program in the schools, and teaches kids to, encourages them and teaches them to abstain from sex and liquor, alcohol, cigarettes, get them through high school, at least get them through high school. By the way, do you know that if you live in poverty and graduate from high school and hold a job for a year, if you were a male, your statistical odds of living at twice the poverty level are 90%. If you are female and graduate from high school and hold a job for a year and do not get pregnant before you get married, your odds of living at twice the poverty level are 96%. So it's a remarkably mobile country. You just have to observe a few conditions and finish high school among them. Anyway, my wife, when I got the job, said, Don't do this job the way everybody else does. She said, you should do it differently. You should go around the country and teach before you make your pronouncements. She said, don't make your pronouncements right away. Do your homework first. I said, why should I be different from the other guys? And she said, because you're the Secretary of Education, do your homework. So I said, what do you want me to do? She said, go teach, go to school and find out what they're doing or not doing. Meet teachers, meet students, meet their parents, and then make your pronouncements. I said, honey, I am the Secretary of Education of the United States. I don't do retail, I do wholesale. And she, the daughter of a very successful business executive, said, do good retail and you'll do better wholesale, Go see how the product works one-to-one. So I went to 120 schools around the country, and I taught 3rd grade, 7th grade, 11th grade. And I spent days at school. It was all over California. I was everywhere. Ended up doing the drug czar job the same way. I was in San Diego, and I spoke to a class of seniors on the Federalist Papers. A young lady raised her hand and said, you really love this country, don't you? I said, yeah. She said, well, I'd sort of like to love it too, but I'm not sure, I have reasons for it. And I said, well, it's almost the end of the session here, as it's almost the end of this presentation. I said, but I'll just tell you one thing. Just think about this. I said, every country your sons lived in, every country has gates. And, some are locked, some aren't. And one way, it's not the only way, but one way to judge a country is when you raise the gates, which way do people run? Do they run in or do they run out? Now in America, when you raise the gates, people run in. When you don't raise the gates, people run in. Stop. You can't keep them out of here. There must be something going on here. But you've all, heard about or been to East Germany, and you know what happened there. But people died. I will die trying to get out of here, and many did. So that's one test. That's a test of a country. And those folks who are many of them posing, in Europe about us and about ugly Americans in America. One good thing in this election, I was on a lot of European TV before. They said, can this actually happen in America? I said, what are you, crazy? Of course it could happen in America. Black man, of course it can happen, probably will. I said, I was in 96, somebody was talking to Colin Powell. I just thought he would be an interesting choice for the Republican Party. I think he might have won too. Would have been very, very interesting. His politics aren't mine. I'm a lot more conservative than he is. But of course, this was going to happen in America. So some of this is just posturing. But at the end of the day, the Gates test is like where you want to send your kids to get educated. That great story that profiled the 5 most successful mullahs in Saudi Arabia, the most successful preachers, guys who got the Joel Osteens of Saudi Arabia, if I may, but they're not to be mistaken for them. They don't look like them. They don't sound like them. They're not preaching this. But they're like the super successful ones, railing against America, railing against the great Satan. And where do their kids go to college? Cal Poly, you bet. Send them to America. That's the test that matters.
Sir, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, you're the boss.
I just retired as an educator for 40 years. I would say the last 15 I gave all my elementary teachers and middle school teachers your book, children's book Virtues, to read to their kids in the middle school. And I say that to ask the question because you say don't give more money to education. We don't need it. I agree with you. The biggest problem that I saw in the school system, and it goes back to the family question, we have too many people who don't send their kids to school to learn.
Yeah.
And so if we can fix the family, we can fix education because it's not a money question.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. The teachers, whom I do listen to, a lot of them, not the unions, but the teachers, when we ask them, and I used to ask them all the time, what's the single thing that would most improve your life? They say, get me a better brand of parent. Get me a parent who will just do certain basic things like make sure the kid comes to school on time, having done his homework, not having watched TV all night, full night's sleep, and with the right attitude toward learning. Respect the teachers, do what you're supposed to do, and we'll get the job done. There's no question. Not every teacher is a parent, but every parent is a teacher. The child's first teacher and the child's all but indispensable teacher. When I was Secretary of Education, I was scheduled to go to somewhere near San Diego. I can't remember it, but it was a very large Vietnamese community, Vietnamese American community. And I was scheduled to go and talk to the parents, almost all Vietnamese Americans. And they called me the week before and said, we have to cancel. I said, why? I said, math test the next day. Parents will not be there. Parents will not be there. They will be with their kids doing the math. That's all you need to know. That tells you something about aspiration. Now, let me tell you this, though, about school. One of the reasons the schools matter is because good schools do make a difference in a child's life. And as you know, some children have been saved by schools. One of my heroes was Jaime Escalante, the great Escalante of Garfield High School in Los Angeles. The research is now out, very plain. The single most important factor in the educational setting is the quality of the teacher, not the size of the classroom. California spent billions wasting money by reducing class size. It is the quality of the teacher, not the size of the classroom. This research is terrific. You take a student who's right in the middle, 50th percentile, math and reading. You give him a good teacher, good to excellent teacher, for 3 years, 87th percentile. Mediocre to poor teacher for 3 years, 14th percentile. Now you tell me that doesn't make a difference. It makes a huge difference. But the hardest thing, as you know, for an administrator to do in our school system is to try to get rid of an incompetent educator. It's just almost impossible. By the way, accept the other part of that. I would pay our good teachers more, a lot more, and I would encourage our bad teachers to another line of work. That's what I would do. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.